Parshat Tisa contains one of the low points of Jewish history, in that the Jewish people stood at the foot of Har Sinai at the time of the giving of the Torah and sinned in the famous episode of the golden calf, the Egel HaZahav, and worshipped Avodah Zarah at the moment of the greatest revelation of God in Jewish history at Ma'amad Har Sinai. We know that ultimately the Jewish people were forgiven, and although Moshe broke the luchos when he saw that the Jewish people sinning, those tablets were replaced with the luchos shnios, the second set of tablets, with the same 10 commandments written on them. We know, however, that there's a significant difference between the first luchos and the second luchos. The first luchos were chiseled by God, the stones themselves were formed by God, and the writing on the luchos was written by God himself. In the case of the second luchos, God decided to ask Moshe, Psalacha, Shnei luchos avanim karishonim. You should chisel and create these second set of tablets on which I, God, will write the second set of luchos in the same way that I wrote the first set of luchos. So although the words were the same, and both times they were written by God, the second tablets were chiseled by Moshe Rabbeinu, were formed by Moshe. And certainly this symbolizes a fundamental difference between the first and second set of luchos, in that the first were more divine, and the second were more human and more man-made. Similarly, Chazal say that in the case of the first luchos, the destiny of the Torah that was going to come with the first luchos was going to be that no one would ever forget anything. Everything in the Torah would be crystal clear as God explained it, and we would never have to have debate or machloket or forgetting or rediscovery of that which seems to be so confusing in the Torah. However, the second luchos, seemingly a reflection of the tragedy of the Egel HaZahav and the diminished kedusha of the second luchos, would come with human error, human fallacy, forgetfulness, and all the confusion that goes along with trying to rediscover that which the luchos said and that which God wants of the Jewish people. At the same time, I think we can look at this slightly differently and to say that the Egel HaZahav represents not just the failure of a group of people at a certain time to maintain the standards of the Torah, but represents the definition of human error. That if the first luchos represents perfection, the perfect Torah, the clarity and the godly perfection of the first Torah, then the Egel HaZahav represents the fact that man can't really manage to maintain that level. And if man is put in this world with a set of rules, the destiny of man is that he will sin. The definition of humanity is that it comes with failure and with sin, with mistakes. And what the second luchos represents is that perhaps imperfection will ultimately prevail. And the second luchos, slightly more imperfect because of the human hand that's involved, will also carry with it the human hand in transmitting the Masorah and doing all the hard work that is necessary to find clarity where it is not obvious, to rediscover that which by definition will be forgotten by human error. And the second luchos represents this legacy, and the second luchos lasted for much longer. At the same time, the Aron contains both the first luchos as well as the fragments of the first luchos, the second complete luchos and the fragments of the first luchos, to represent the fact that the luchos rishonos is that which we aspire for. We aspire to perfection. We aspire to godliness. But the reality is that the Torah that we follow is the luchos shnios, the second luchos, with the imperfection and the human involvement in the process of the Torah. In the very same way, we can think about the sin of Adam Harishon in the same way. God puts Adam in a place of perfection. The Garden of Eden, the Gan Eden, a place of perfection where everything was perfect and Adam was expected to maintain perfection. And when Adam and Chava sinned, they had to be banished from the Garden of Eden because it's not a place for imperfection, it's a place for perfection. And what the sin of Adam also represents is that man cannot maintain himself or herself in an environment that demands perfection. Man is by definition imperfect and must live with the world, and therefore can no longer be in Gan Eden, and Gan Eden will be ultimately guarded by angels, as the Torah says, because angels are perfect, but man is not perfect, is imperfect. But man has the capacity of tshuva, of growth, of the ability to bounce back from mistake and to become stronger, to learn from his mistakes and to be enriched by his experiences, and to overcome the temptations, which makes man even greater than angels. And that, I think, is the purpose of the story of Bereshit, of Gan Eden, that we aspire to perfection, we aspire to no sin. We aspire to not do the Egel Hazav and to have the Luchos Rishonos. But that is our aspiration. But the reality is that man will sin. But man does possess the ability of tshuva, of growth, of learning from mistakes, of becoming even greater from the mistakes, and therefore exceeding the ultimate kedusha of angels. Speaking of human fallacy, this weekend is President's Weekend, and we remember George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, who also passed away in this month. And the Torah, if you look through all of Sefer Shemot and Vayikra, the word Nasi, president, appears one time. Nasi asher yechate, that if a president, a leader, sins, then he brings a special korban for his sin. And Chazal say that the word Nasi asher yechate is an allusion to the word Ashrei, fortunate. And fortunate, the Talmud says, is a generation whose leader can honestly confront sin and admit to mistakes. Because leaders, like all humans, are prone to human error and to mistake and to sin. Fortunate is a generation whose leadership possesses the humility and the honesty to admit our mistakes and to grow from them. Fortunate is a generation whose leaders recognize that they're not just there to balance a budget, but the leader is there to set an ethical and moral standard for the entire society. And one thing we all know about George Washington is that he confessed to his sins of chopping down the cherry tree. Even though it's not really a true story, this is the kind of story that's made up about a person who's known for his ethics, for his morality, and his knowledge that he represents the leadership of the nation, and the same with honest Abe Lincoln. We can paraphrase Chazal and say, Ashrei, fortunate is a generation who makes up stories of high ethical character for our leaders and aspire to learn from those values in the anecdotes that we make up. And through this, we can grow to be exceedingly great on the level of leaders, on the level of angels, to maximize the purpose and destiny of humanity in this world.